Hello, I put this presentation together so I could share with the people of this great country a true and accurate view of history about what happened to our country. These facts I'm going to show you are not Republican or Democratic in nature. They are documents from the Library of Congress, State Archives, Supreme Court, Senate and Congressional records and reports. Anyone can go get a certified copy of any of these documents for your own research. What I'm going to show you is a small but important part of what has delivered this country into its current condition. And I kindly ask you, do not believe what I'm going to show you. Please do your own research and the truth will be yours. One of the reasons we are in the shape we are in as a country is because people let other people do our job for us. The story these facts tell are about a corporate takeover history forgot to tell you about. J. Edgar Hoover said, "The individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous that people cannot believe it even exists. I promise you this monster is real." This is a private document under non-corporate venue. We're going to discuss the Civil War and how it affects us today by putting us under military rule, the Reconstruction Acts and the 14th Amendment and how it changed our status. We will show the fraud of Congress, banking, Federal Reserve, IRS, and much more. And we will do this using congressional record, Supreme Court opinions, and rulings of the law. Facts about the South seceding from the Union. Slavery was not an issue. It was states' rights. Lincoln even told President Davis that slavery would be intact if they came back into the Union. Davis's response was, "No, because slavery is not the struggle we fight in this war." 4 states that fought with the North were slave states: Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri. They all had slaves, and they certainly would not fight a war to end slavery. Now, I'm not saying slavery was right, slavery was wrong, and it needed to end, but this is not what the war was about. President Buchanan did not wage war on the seceded states. South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas all seceded while he was in office. November 1860, Lincoln was elected president. He received 40% of the popular vote, but won 59% of the electoral votes. He was not on the ballot in many of the deep southern states. On February 28, 1861, North Carolina legislature voted on whether they wanted a convention to consider seceding. The call for convention was defeated by 651 votes. North Carolina would not even consider it. March 30th, 1861, an address to the people of Texas put forth by Representative of Texas, giving warning that under the pretense of freeing slaves, the actual intention of the incoming Lincoln administration was to enslave the whole nation, an ominous warning of what was to come. Why did North Carolina secede from the Union? On April 15, 1861, the Secretary of War notified Governor Ellis of North Carolina that the federal government expected North Carolina to furnish 2 regiments of troops to make war on the seceded states. In Governor Ellis's refusal, he closed with these words, "I can be no party to this wicked violation of the laws of this country, and to this war upon the liberties of a free people. You can get no troops from North Carolina." North Carolina seceded from the Union. One thing that's very important to understand about how the Civil War affected us as a country today is understanding the rules of engagement for the Civil War. General Orders 100, also known as the Lieber Code, dated April 24, 1863, had a lot of stuff in it, and a lot of it was very important, but there are a few articles in here that I've listed that are more important than others. Article 3 states, "Martial law in a hostile country consists in the suspension by the occupying military authority of the criminal and civil law, and of the domestic administration and government in the occupied place or territory." I will show you with certified documents that we are occupied place or territory. In our law, the Constitution has been suspended. Article 7 shows martial law extends to property and to persons, whether they are subjects of enemies or aliens to that government or not. Article 26 states, "Commanding generals may cause the magistrates and civil officers of the hostile country to take an oath of temporary allegiance or an oath of fidelity to their own victorious government or rulers, and they may expel everyone who declines to do so. Article 31 is also very important. It states a victorious army appropriates or seizes all public money, all public movable property until further direction by its government, and sequesters for its own benefit or that of its government all the revenues of the real property belonging to the hostile government or nation. Article 32 states, the commander of the army must leave it to the ultimate treaty of peace to settle the permanency of this change. There has never been a treaty of peace ending the Civil War, and we are still under these military rules. This is from the National Park Service website. The question is, where was the treaty signed? The answer, there was no treaty signed that ended the Civil War. Further proof that we're still under military rule and have no property rights. In Senate Document 43, also known as Senate Resolution 62, dated April 17, 1933, 60 years after the beginning of the Civil War, states that the ultimate ownership of all property is in the state. Individual so-called ownership is only by virtue of government, i.e. law, and subordinate to the necessities of the state. This is the document that text that I just read you came out of. It's titled Contracts Payable in Gold. On page 9, paragraph 2, the very first sentence is exactly what I read you. It's highlighted in yellow. And what happened, or what this discussion was about, is Senate was discussing the types of money we had. We had paper that was backed by nothing, or fiat money that the Federal Reserve was issuing. We had paper that was certificates that had gold backing it, so they were gold certificates. And we also had gold and silver. So we had three different kinds of money, one of them being completely worthless, the Federal Reserve note we use today, and the other two that had value. And what Senate was discussing was, why should we allow the people to use money of value, i.e. gold and silver, when the state owns all the property anyway? Why do we care how they pay for the property? The state owns it all. So everything was settled after the Civil War, right? In 1865, North Carolina was admitted back into the Union as the 12th state. On December 4th, 1865, North Carolina even ratified a new 13th Amendment, proving that the state was back into the Union. The old 13th Amendment, something history forgot to tell you about again, was ratified in 1819. It was removed from the history books in the Constitution, unlawfully, of course. It said, if any citizen of the United States shall accept, claim, receive, or retain any title of nobility or honor, such person shall cease to be a citizen of the United States, and shall be incapable of holding any office of trust or profit under them, or either of them. Example they used was Esquire. We'll get into that in a little bit, but they did not want people taking a foreign title to be able to be a United States citizen. But North Carolina, along with other states, refused to ratify the 14th Amendment. Why? Why was the 14th Amendment so bad? On June 13, 1967, United States Representative Rarick of Louisiana submitted to the United States Congress Louisiana House Concurrent Resolution urging the United States Congress to declare the 14th Amendment to be illegal. He also entered a treatise on the illegality of the 14th Amendment, prepared by a Louisiana judge, Lender H. Perez. The resolution stated, whereas the Reconstruction Acts of Congress unlawfully overthrew their existing governments, removed the lawfully constituted legislators by military force, and replaced them with rump legislators, which carried out military orders and pretended to ratify the 14th Amendment. What in the world is he talking about? I've never heard anything about this in school. On March 2, 1867, faced with ratification failure, Congress passed over President Johnson's vetoes 3 Reconstruction Acts from March 2, 1867 through July 19, 1867, declaring the southern state governments to be illegal. This is 2 years after the end of the Civil War. What's illegal about it? Following are excerpts from President Johnson's veto message to Congress regarding its first Reconstruction Act. The military is being used to coerce the people into adopting principles and measures that they are opposed to. in which they have an undeniable right to exercise their own judgment. The bill is without precedent and without authority, in palpable conflict with the Constitution, and utterly destructive to those principles of liberty and humanity for which our ancestors on both sides of the Atlantic have shed so much blood and expended so much treasure. The purpose and object of the bill is to change the entire structure and character of the state governments and to compel them by force to the adoption of the organic laws and regulations, which they are unwilling to accept if left to themselves. If they do not form a constitution with prescribed articles in it, and afterwards elect a legislature which will act upon certain measures in a prescribed way, neither blacks nor whites can be relieved from the slavery which the bill imposes upon them. Those are some pretty important words by a sitting president of the United States. The Tulane Law Review, Volume 28 of 1953, in an article entitled The Dubious Origin of the 14th Amendment by Walter J. Sutton, Jr., former president of the Louisiana State Bar Association, states, "The most extreme and amazing feature of the Act as the requirement that each excluded state must ratify the 14th Amendment in order to again enjoy the status and states and rights of a state, including representation in Congress. Section 3 of the Act sets forth this compulsive coercion thus imposed upon the southern states. The most apt characterization of this compulsive provision, placing these states under military authority, there to remain until they comply, inter alia, with this requirement of ratifying the rejected 14th Amendment, is found in a speech of Senator Doolittle, Wisconsin, a Northerner and a conservative Republican. During the floor debate on the bill, he said, "My friend has said what has been said all around me, and what is said every day. The people of the South have rejected the constitutional amendment, and therefore we will march upon them and force them to adopt it at the point of a bayonet, and establish military rule over them until they do adopt it." Sources: Congressional Globe, 39th Congress, 2nd Session, 1867. Surely the authors of our Constitution never contemplated or understood that ratification of a constitutional amendment proposed by a state could lawfully be compelled at the point of a bayonet. The constitutionality of the Reconstruction Acts went before the Supreme Court in Mississippi v. Johnson. The court dismissed on technical grounds that the court had no jurisdiction of a bill to enjoin the President in the performance of his official duties. The Reconstruction Acts went to the Supreme Court a second time in Georgia v. Stanton. The court found an equally good technical reason for declining jurisdiction by holding that the case concerned purely political matters instead of personal and property rights. The court held that a bill to restrain the defendants who represent the executive authority of the government from carrying into execution certain acts of Congress, inasmuch as such execution would annul and totally abolish the existing state governments of Georgia, is not within the jurisdiction of this court. The Reconstruction Acts went to the Supreme Court a third time. The U.S. Supreme Court assumed jurisdiction on the constitutionality of the Reconstruction Acts, and were argued before the Supreme Court. But before the Supreme Court could enter a judgment, the Republicans in control of Congress rushed through a bill repealing the appellate jurisdiction of the Supreme Court under the Act of 1867, prohibiting the Supreme Court from proceeding on any appeal already before it. The court waited until the bill was passed and then postponed further consideration of the matter until the next term. In the biggest battle between Congress and the Supreme Court in this nation's history, for the first time, Congress removed the court's jurisdiction to hear a case. The last attempt to obtain a ruling on the constitutionality of the Reconstruction Acts was made in the case of Ex parte Yeager v. Wallace. The Supreme Court assumed jurisdiction, and this action was immediately answered by the introduction of a bill in the Senate explicitly prohibiting the Supreme Court from considering any case which involved the validity of the Reconstruction Acts, followed by another prohibiting the judicial review of any acts of Congress. Never before and never since in our nation's history has any crime like this has ever happened. So how did the Reconstruction Acts affect North Carolina? From 1865 until his removal in 1868, Governor Jonathan Worth fought against the programs of Reconstruction emerging from Washington, D.C. He loathed the 14th Amendment and the Reconstruction Acts, passed early in 1867, which provided for military rule, a new state constitution, and elections to replace the existing government. The source from this is the University of North Carolina Press, 1996, pages 272 through 273. On June 30, 1868, General Canby of the U.S. Army issued General Orders 120, which states in part, to facilitate the organization of the new state government, the following appointments are made. To be Governor of North Carolina, W. W. Holden, Governor-elect. Vice Jonathan Worth removed to take effect July 1, 1868, on the meeting of the General Assembly of North Carolina. This is a copy of General Orders 120. It's hard to read in this, but you can get a copy or see the original document in the North Carolina State Archives. What happened is, I believe this was a officer by the name of Williams who actually enforced this General Orders 120, is the military literally went to North Carolina capital, as it did many other states, and removed by force the governor of North Carolina, who was constitutionally elected, because he did not want to go underneath the new military rule form of government. He thought we should be able to stay underneath the constitutional rule form of government. On July 1, 1868, Governor Worth surrendered the government of North Carolina under what he deemed military duress, and not of the consent of the governed. During a time of supposed peace, in a letter addressed to W. W. Holden of North Carolina, he surrenders the state of North Carolina. The letter states in part, "Yesterday morning I was verbally notified by Chief Justice Pearson that in obedience to a telegram from General Canby, he would today at 10 a.m. administer to you the oaths required preliminary to you entering upon the discharge of duties of civil governor of the state, and that thereupon you would demand possession of my office. I intimated to the judge my opinion that such proceeding was premature, even under the Reconstruction legislation of Congress, that I should probably decline to surrender the office to you. I do not recognize the validity of the late election under which you and those cooperating with you claim to be invested with the civil government of the state. You have no evidence of your election, save the certificate of a Major General of the United States Army. I regard all of you as, in effect, appointees of the military power of the United States, and not as deriving your powers from the consent of those you claim to govern. Knowing, however, that you are backed by military force here, which I could not resist if I would, I do not deem it necessary to offer a futile opposition, but vacate the office without the ceremony of actual eviction, offering no further opposition than this, my protest. I would submit to an actual expulsion in order to bring before the Supreme Court of the United States the question as to the constitutionality of the legislation under which you claim to be the rightful governor of the state, if the past action of that tribunal furnished any hope of a speedy trial. I surrender the office to you under what I deem military duress, without stopping, as the occasion would well justify, to comment upon the singular coincidence that the present state government is surrendered, as without legality, to him whose own official sanction but 3 years ago declared it valid. Governor Holden swore in Governor Worth in 1865. This didn't just happen in North Carolina, it happened in several other states, I believe 9 other states that would not ratify the 14th Amendment. This is a copy of the original letter that the text came out of. It's 3 pages long, and you can again receive a copy of this from the North Carolina State Archives. Other laws that affected the rights of the American people. The Trading with the Enemy Act, 1917. This act was implemented to deal with countries that we were at war with during World War I, Germany and Austria. It gave the President and alien property custodian the right to seize the assets of the people included in this act. And if they wanted to do business in this country, they could apply for a license or a permit to do so. What they were talking about in this act, and you really need to read the entire act to understand it, but basically if you were a German citizen and you had a company or something that did business in the United States, and you were not a threat to the security of the United States, you could apply for a license to continue to do business in this country. But if they thought you were a threat to do business in this country, they would seize your assets. By 1921, the Federal Reserve Bank held over $700 million in trust for the alien property custodian and the President. What's important about this act is in 1933, 48 Stat 1, which was done March 9th, the very first act Congress did, is they amended the Trading with the Enemy Act to include the United States person because they wanted to take our gold away. We were a threat to the government. In order for the government to take our gold away and violate our constitutional rights, we were reclassified as enemy combatants. This is a copy of 48 Stat 1, which amended 40 Stat 411, the Trading with the Enemy Act. The original Trading with the Enemy Act only affected the people of the countries we were at war with. This amendment allowed the President to take control over the assets of any person within the United States or any place subject to the jurisdiction thereof. A review of events that took away your God-given rights. In 1860, Congress was adjourned sine die, which means without a day. Lincoln could not legally reconvene Congress, so he reconvened it outside of the constitutional limits. In 1863, the Lieber Code was established, taking away your property and your rights. 1864 through 1867, several Reconstruction Acts were passed, forcing states to ratify the 14th Amendment, which made everyone slaves. And those are the words of a president. June 30th, 1868, Governor Jonathan Worth was removed from office because he opposed Reconstruction Acts, the 14th Amendment, and military rule. March 9th, 1933, the United States person was added to the Trading with the Enemy Act, making us enemy combatants. April 5th, 1933, Executive Order 6102 was given, making it illegal for a U.S. person to own gold. And April 17th, 1933, Senate Document 43 said, "It doesn't matter how we pay for things because the state owns everything anyway." Further proof of the fraud, Title 28, U.S. Code, Section 3002, states, "The United States is a federal corporation." Senate Report 93-549, Paragraph 1, states, "The United States has been under dictatorial control since March 9, 1933. Remember the Trading with the Enemy Act? How the American people were added to the enemy list?" In the same Senate report, Paragraph 2, states, "The extraordinary powers have been delegated to the President, ordinarily exercised by Congress, which affect the lives of American citizens in a host of all-encompassing matters, to rule the country without reference to normal constitutional process." This is the report of Special Committee on the Termination of National Emergency War and Emergency Powers Acts, November 19, 1973. In Downs v. Bidwell, 182, U.S. 244, in the year of 1901, the dissenting opinion of Justice Marshall Harlan, he stated, "Two national governments exist, one to be maintained under the Constitution with all its restrictions, and the other to be maintained by Congress outside and independently of that instrument. This is what we see operating in D.C. today. They are not operating under the rules of the Constitution. They are operating under military rules, which gives the President extraordinary powers, as evidenced in these Senate reports." Can we vote someone into office to fix our country? The answer is no. We are underneath military rule, as evidenced by the different reports I just showed you. We need to get back underneath the form of law known as a Constitution. Congress is destructive to the American people, and I don't care what your politics are. No political officer today is bound by their oath of office. Their oath is their contract protecting the rights of the people. If they violate their oath, it's a capital crime. You'll find that most public officers do not have their oaths properly filed as the law requires them to. This way, they can't get charged with a capital crime. It's simply a misdemeanor in North Carolina if they don't have their oath of office filed. If Congress will not do what the President wants them to, he will issue an executive order, which is something that can only be done during times of national emergencies. There have been over 12,000 executive orders. Remember, the Senate report says we've been underneath a state of national emergency since 1933. The American people have failed to occupy the lawful offices created by our founding fathers since 1860. And we no longer have the three branches of government. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute also. So how did the Constitution or our founding fathers structure our government? Ben Franklin was asked, what kind of government do we have? He said, a republic if you can keep it. Article 4, Section 4 guarantees to every state in this union a republican form of government. What is a republic? It means that law governs man. Man can't change it. What is a democracy or an oligarchy? It's when men govern each other by manipulating laws and statutes. Clearly what we have today. In this cartoon, the squirrel thinks democracy is a great political system. The raccoon thinks he's a dope, and the fox agrees. So the fox and the raccoon hold a vote on whether or not it's time to eat the squirrel. And since they outnumber the squirrel, they win, the squirrel loses. They get to eat the squirrel. The squirrel's not so happy about it anymore. That's how democracy works. In a republic, the squirrel would be protected by the law, and raccoon and fox could not vote on having squirrel for dinner. We started being called a democracy around 1913 by President Woodrow Wilson. He said the American people are unable to make good decisions for themselves, so the government needs to be able to make those decisions for them. It's time to eat the squirrel. Plato said, a democracy passes into despotism, a form of government by which a single entity rules with absolute and unlimited power. Karl Marx said, democracy is the road to socialism. So you pick. Do you want a democracy where everybody can vote against you to take your property away or any of your rights away? Or do you want to live in a republic where the law stands and men can't change that law and you're protected by those laws? So how is the power divided to protect the republic? We're supposed to have 3 branches of government, each equal in power. The executive, legislative, judicial. And then there's the hidden 4th branch, which is we the people. We have failed to exercise our branch of government. What power does the executive branch have? All these departments listed here are off the .gov website and underneath the direct control of the President of the United States. What power does our legislative branch have? The U.S. Senate has the ability to control the Committee of Office websites, okay, their Senate homepage, their leadership, okay, not a lot there. Representatives, again, websites, homepage, leadership offices. It doesn't look like our House really has a lot of power. And can the legislative branch control anything of importance when the President can issue an executive order to do what he wants without approval of the House of Representatives? Without your approval? So what does it matter what power the legislative branch has? You've seen today in the news to where if Congress won't do what the President wants, he'll just issue an executive order. Or if they won't pass a bill like cap and trade, he will have the EPA just go ahead and put the rules and regulations in for you. So legislative branch does not have a lot of power. It's really just for your entertainment. What powers does the judicial branch have? Does it matter? Congress will just pass a law restricting the courts from hearing any arguments that it does not want the court to hear. And they've certainly done this in the past. So who is working against the American people? The Queen, the lawyers, the unions, the Federal Reserve, the IRS, the government, the bankers? What proof do we have of this? How is the Queen involved? She gets your Social Security. Statutory Instrument 1997, titled the Social Security, is an instrument that you need to look up and read the entire document, but it is an amendment to the 1984 Agreement on Social Security between the governments of the United Kingdom of Great Britain, Northern Ireland, and the government of the United States. It's an administrative agreement and the implementation of the agreement. And you need to go through it, like I said earlier, and read the entire document. But it talks about how our Social Security Act was amended and how she has control over it. She gets everything. And you can see at the bottom, and territory is defined as regards the United States, the states, and the District of Columbia. Who controls the Queen? The 1213 Papal Decree says the Pope controls the Queen. On April 21st, 1214, the Pope in Rome formally accepted King John's surrender of his kingdoms. King John turned over all the assets to the Pope in his pledge of Versailles. And 3 months later, in July 1214, Pope Innocent III raised the interdict against the English. Thus, the Pope assured the English of having access to heaven, from which they had been barred by their king's opposition to the Church of the Nazarene, or communist totalitarianism and denial of civil rights to mankind. The source of this is the British Museum publication, Magna Carta 211, and American Council of Christian Laymen. What happened here is obviously the king was afraid that he wouldn't be able to make it into heaven because he was sinning. So Pope Innocent III said, hey, guess what, you guys? You can buy your way into heaven. I am a Christian man and believe in the Christ. But no matter what your beliefs are, I don't think anybody rightfully believes that you can buy your way into heaven. That you get into heaven by your fruit, not by how much you pay. Why haven't our lawmakers fixed this? Remember the original 13th Amendment that barred attorneys or esquires from holding offices or being United States citizens? The report dated September 21st, 1950, Report on National Lawyers Guild. It's a Senate report, pursuant to House Resolution 5, 79th Congress. It states, the National Lawyers Guild is the foremost legal bulwark of the Communist Party, its front organizations, and controlled unions. Since its inception, it has never failed to rally to the legal defense of Communist Party and individual members thereof, including known espionage agents. It has constantly fought against national, state, local legislation aimed at curbing the communist conspiracy. It has been most articulate in its attacks upon all agencies of the government seeking to expose or prosecute the subversive activities of the communist network, including national, state, and local investigative committees, the Department of Justice, the FBI, law enforcement agencies generally. Through its affiliation with the International Association of Democratic Lawyers and International Communist Front Organization, the National Lawyers Guild has constituted itself an agent of the foreign principle hostile to the interests of the United States. It has gone far afield to oppose the foreign policies of the United States, in line with the current line of the Soviet Union. These aims, the real aims of the National Lawyers Guild, as demonstrated conclusively by its activities for the past 13 years of its existence, are not specified in its constitution or statement of avowed purpose. They're doing it in secret. In order to attract non-communists to serve as a cover for its actual purpose and its appendage to the Communist Party, the National Lawyers Guild poses benevolently as a professional organization which shall function as an effective social force in the service of all the people to end human rights, shall be regarded as more sacred than property rights. In the entire history of the Guild, there is no record of its ever having condemned such instances of violating the human rights, such as found in the Soviet slave labor camps and in a series of Moscow trials which shocked the civilized world. Communists publicly hailed the founding of the National Lawyers Guild. New Mass, a weekly publication of the Communist Party, featured an article entitled Defense for the Council, the Need for the National Lawyers Guild, in its issue June 14, 1933, pages 19 and 21, by Charles Reich, an attorney for the Soviet government and a member of the Guild, observed that, with the growth of the American Labor Party, unions, that's what he's talking about, in New York, and kindred progressive movements throughout the United States, the lawyers, who in many of the smaller communities are the nerve centers of political activities, will be an invaluable aid in galvanizing the latent liberal elements of the country into a political force. The National Lawyers Guild can and will form one of the most important adjuncts into a progressive movement representing the interests of the workers and farmers. This is that title page for that particular document. And again, it is a Senate report. You can see on this document it is the 81st Congress, Second Session, House Report number 3123. What is the Federal Reserve? Rockefeller, Warburg, Aldrich, J.P. Morgan, and other bankers created the Federal Reserve Plan in a private meeting on Jekyll Island, November 22, 1910. You need to research Eustace Mullins, The Secrets of the Federal Reserve, and The Creature from Jekyll Island. Charles A. Lindbergh stated, the financial system has been turned over to the Federal Reserve Board. That board administers a finance system by authority of a purely profiteering group. That system is private, conducted for the sole purpose of obtaining the greatest possible profits from the use of other people's money. This act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the President signs this bill, the invisible government by the monetary power will be legalized. The people may not know it immediately, but the day of reckoning is only a few years removed. the worst legislative crime of the ages perpetrated by this banking bill. In 1913, the Federal Reserve Act was passed, with only 3 congressmen voting on it. Congress was not properly adjourned for Christmas break, allowing this to happen. Congressional Record, March 3, 1934. Congressman Weidman stated, "So the paramount issue of today is this. Shall the government of the United States be run for the benefit of the international bankers, or shall the citizens of the United States be given the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Shall we replace the Statue of Liberty with a golden statue erected to the god of greed? Shall we forget that the only time our Savior used force was when he drove the money changers from the temple? Let us reestablish the principle that we all believe in, that all men are entitled to a right to work, to own their homes, to reap a just reward for their labors, and to enjoy nature's sunshine as God intended. We owe it to our children that we shall not depart and leave them in a condition of bondage and slavery to organized greed and gold." In Lewis versus the United States, 680, it states the Federal Reserve Bank is privately owned. We conclude that the Federal Reserve Banks are not federal instrumentalities. You need to read the entire congressional record from 1934. The discussions on the floor during this time are unreal. I recommend 1933, 1913, really just about any of those. You will not believe what you read. So how is the government using your taxes? We're going to talk about the Grace Commission report. And this was written by a man by the name of Peter Grace. He was commissioned by Ronald Reagan, and what they were trying to do is find out how could we save the American taxpayers more money. And this is a part of the report that Grace turned in to Ronald Reagan. Again, I suggest that you look and research the Grace Commission report and read the whole thing for yourself. It states, "Mr. President, you have been so correct in resisting attempts to balance the budget by increasing taxes. The tax load on the average American family is already at counterproductive levels, with the underground economy having now grown to an estimated $500 billion per year, costing about $100 billion in lost federal tax revenues per year. The size of the underground economy is understandable when one considers that median family income taxes have increased from $9 in 1948 to $2,218 in 1983, or by 246 times. This is runaway taxation at its worst. 1/3 of all their taxes is consumed by waste and inefficiency in the federal government, as we identified in our survey. Another 1/3 of all their taxes escapes collection from all others as the underground economy blossoms in direct proportion to tax increases and places even more pressure on law-abiding taxpayers, promoting still more underground economy, a vicious cycle that must be broken. With 2/3 of everyone's personal income taxes wasted or not collected, 100% of what is collected is absorbed solely by the interest of the federal debt and by the federal government contributions to transfer payments. In other words, all individual income tax revenues are gone before one nickel is spent on the services which taxpayers expect from the government. Folks, that is directly out of the Grace Commission report. Your tax dollars today still go to the same people. It goes to the Federal Reserve. It goes to pay the interest on the national debt. Today, that interest is $280-some billion. I think they said on the news by the year 2020 it will be almost $1 trillion or $800-some billion just to service the debt of this country. You guys need to research the Federal Reserve and see how that really works. They loan you nothing and charge you interest for it. So who is the IRS? The Government Accounting Offices, or GAO, stated in 2007 that the IRS is a foreign corporation. The 1954 Army Handbook has the IRS listed as a foreign debt collector. I'm sure all of you have heard about tax protesters and of how they go to jail, and I'm not telling you not to pay taxes. But I am telling you need to research and understand the IRS. You need to research and look at the people like Sherry Field Jackson, former IRS agents, CID enforcement officers, that went to prison because they realized that there was no law saying they had to pay taxes. This is a copy of the Grace Commission report. Again, please go and get your own copy. You can get them off the internet, but if you don't feel comfortable with that, go directly to the Library of Congress and ask them for a copy. It's the government trying to protect us or control us. This report is called the National Security Study Memorandum, titled as NSSM 200. Implications of Worldwide Population Growth. This was done by Henry Kissinger in 1974, and it was a confidential report that was left that way until the 80s. It's a long report, about 123 pages. Again, this is a really good report. You need to read it so you understand really what your government is doing for you. We'll talk about just a few sections here. Section 28, world policy and programs in the population field should incorporate two major objectives. A, actions to accommodate continued population growth with up to 6 billion by the mid-21st century without massive starvation or total frustration of developmental hopes. And B, actions to keep the ultimate levels as close as possible to 8 billion, rather than permitting it to reach 10 billion or 13 billion or more. What are they going to do to keep population from growing? While specific goals in this area are difficult to state, our aim should be for the world to achieve a replacement level of fertility, a two-child family on average, about the year 2000. This will require the present 2% growth rate to decline to 1.7% within a decade and to 1.1% by the year 2000. Compared to the UN median projection, this goal would result in 500 million fewer people in 2000 and about 3 billion fewer in 2050. Attainment of this goal will require greatly intensified population programs. A basis for developing national population growth control targets to achieve this world target is contained in the World Population Plan of Action. The World Population Plan of Action is not self-enforcing and will require vigorous efforts by interested countries, UN agencies, and other international bodies to make it effective. U.S. leadership is essential. Guys, you need to read this report. This is the title page for the National Security Memorandum. I included the table of contents on this. Again, you can see that it's titled Confidential. Because you need to see what's in this report. We're not going to put the entire report here because it would take a month to go through it. But Chapter 2, Population and World Food Supplies. Chapter 4, Economic Development and Population Growth. 5, Implications of Population Pressures for the National Security. How is population going to affect our security? World Population Conference. A U.S. Global Population Strategy. Section 2, Action to create conditions for fertility decline, population, and a development assistance strategy. What are they talking about? Actions to create conditions for a fertility decline. You guys need to read that section of the report. B, functional assistant programs to create conditions for fertility decline. They're going to create conditions for fertility decline, and they're not talking about teaching abstinence. Food for peace programs and population. That particular one talks about mainly to the third world countries. Hey, third world countries, we will let you have food if you get your population growth in control. Research to improve fertility control technology. Utilization of mass media and satellite communication systems for family planning. Action to develop worldwide political and popular commitment to population stability. You also might want to look up a 1927 Supreme Court case that upheld that it was constitutional or legal to do forced sterilization. Where does all the other tax money go? If I stop paying my taxes, how will the roads and schools get built? The Grace Commission report showed you that all your income tax is wasted or goes to pay interest on the national debt, which is a pure profit to a private bank called the Federal Reserve. Let's look at North Carolina's Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, or CAFR Fund report. Maybe we can find a clue there. This is the cover for the 2009 North Carolina CAFR statement. The report is over 300 pages long, and I'm not going to go over all 300 pages now. You can do that on your time. You might want to look up your state's CAFR report also. But I will show you a few things that are in the report. On this page you can see that North Carolina has over $82 billion in assets and $11 billion in liabilities. That leaves net assets around $70 billion. And they're going to raise your taxes? Seems like they have enough money already. The city, county, and federal capper statements will show you much the same information. That is, that your government is well funded and takes your tax dollars and puts them in trust to benefit other people, not the people that pay the taxes. You need to spend some time researching the capper funds. A good place to start is www.cafr1.com. This is Walter Buren's website. He has spent years researching the capper funds, and he can give you a lot of information so you can completely understand your capper statement. Now we're going to talk about how our banking system works. This is a very involved education. We're going to just kind of touch on some important topics. Again, I please ask you to do your own research, look your own bank up, find your own truth. It's what's important is what will save this country. What does the U.S. Constitution say on paying debt? Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution clearly states the following: no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payments of debts. Guys, you're using the Federal Reserve note to pay debts. On the Federal Reserve website, this question is our current money backed by substance? Gold, silver, anything? The answer is no. And it gives you the clarification of that right there. But I want to ask you a question. If no state can make anything other than gold and silver legal tender in payment in debts, how are you making your house payment, your car payment, your taxes? How is any of that ever getting paid? So, if the Constitution says we can only pay debt with gold and silver, are we violating the Constitution with how we pay debt today? No, because you're not a party to the Constitution. You're an enemy combatant. Remember the Trading with the Enemy Act Amendment, 48 Stat 1? There's also House Joint Resolution, or HJR 192, passed in 1933, also known as Public Law 7310. Made it illegal for anyone to require you to pay a debt in a particular kind or type of currency. It reads, to assure the uniform value to the coins and currency of the United States. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled that every provision contained in or made with respect to an obligation which purports to give the obligee a right to require payments in gold or a particular kind of coin or currency or in any amount of money of the United States measured thereby is declared to be against public policy. It's now illegal for anybody to force you to pay a debt in any particular kind of currency. Every obligation heretofore or hereafter incurred shall be discharged upon payment, dollar for dollar, in any coin or currency at which time of payment is legal tender for public and private debt. Your signature is also legal form of payment, and that's the origins of accepted for value. The definitions of this law, Section B, as used in this resolution, the term obligation means any obligation payable in money of the United States, and the term coin or currency means coin or currency of the United States, including Federal Reserve notes and circulating notes of Federal Reserve banks and national banks. So they did not just make it illegal for somebody to force you to pay a debt in gold or silver. They also made it illegal for somebody to force you to pay a debt in any kind of currency, including Federal Reserve notes. This is an archive-certified copy of this law out of the National Archives. This is the very first page. At the top you see Public Resolution 10, 73rd Congress. And this is the final page of that law. There's only 2 pages, and you can see it was signed by President Roosevelt on June 5th, 1933. Remember the arguments we had on the Senate floor about how we don't really care how people pay for the property because the state owns it all anyway, and then they took away the gold from the people so they couldn't pay their debt that way. And now it's saying, since we can't force you to violate your constitutional rights, we can't force you to pay the bills in any particular kind of currency. So let's talk about how money is created. Money is created by Congress telling Treasury to sell bonds to the Federal Reserve so the Fed can create money. These bonds are based on your labor. This money is created because the Fed is pretty sure that the IRS or Treasury will be able to collect taxes to pay off the debt. Remember, the Grace Commission report, all money is either wasted or it goes to pay the interest on the national debt. Another interesting point of fact is the Federal Reserve Act was passed 2 months later after the Income Tax Act was passed, and the Income Tax Act was deemed unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. You need to research that also. So most of the nation's money is created at your bank when you borrow money. Law says you created the money, and I'm going to prove it in just a minute. So in one way or another, you create all the money. Your slave labor provides the energy for it, but the Federal Reserve gets the interest. So how is money created? Congress votes to increase the federal debt by, let's say, $1 billion, as it says in this particular instruction. Treasury issues bonds to the Federal Reserve, T-bills, T-notes, whatever. And the Federal Reserve spends it in circulation, or the Federal Reserve sends it to banks. Now you see that the banks have multiple arrows coming out of it. What exactly are they talking about? We're going to talk a little bit about UCC law really quick because we're going to get into some Federal Reserve publications, and I want to show you that UCC law is submissive to Federal Reserve publications. UCC law governs all instrument laws, all laws on money, promissory notes and such. So the UCC law reads, Uniform Commercial Code 3-102C says the regulations of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System and the operating circulars of the Federal Reserve Banks supersede any inconsistent provisions of this article. The reason that this is important is to prove that the Federal Reserve publications you are about to see have relevance in law. Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago's publication, Modern Money Mechanics. Again, you can get most of these off the internet. If you don't feel comfortable with them, go to your law library. A lot of them will have a copy of these. States, of course they, meaning banks, don't really pay out loans from the money they receive as deposits. If they did, no additional money would be created. Remember the arrows coming out of the bank? This is what we're going to start talking about. Let's say you go to the bank and you take a $10,000 loan out to the bank. You sign that note, that promissory note, and that bank takes that promissory note and gives you a check for $10,000, right? So the bank loaned you $10,000. Is that what you thought? Well, I'm going to prove to you that nobody has ever gone to a bank in the last 70, 80 years and ever borrowed money. They can take that $10,000 and increase that to $90,000, and it only benefits them through fractionalized banking. This is the cover for the book Modern Money Mechanics. I included a couple pages, but I recommend going to the law library and getting a copy of the book so you can read everything for yourself. Here is a chart that's included in that book. It shows the money expansion process through fractionalized banking. It shows where they started off with $10,000